right, so I'm going to go to Isaiah chapter 30. Okay, and I'll start at the beginning. Okay. And it says, "Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, and that cover with the covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, that walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked in my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. For the princes were at Zoan, and his ambassadors came to Hanes. They were all ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be in help, nor profit, but a shame and also a reproach." Okay, so I'll stop there, and then it goes on, basically talking about the same thing. So one of the things I was thinking about when I read this was that you can almost apply, well, the first thing I was thinking of was the fact that at the end of verse 1 it says, they take counsel but not of me, and they're covered with the covering, and that a cover with the covering but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. So I thought about that the last statement of that they may add sin to sin, and that trying to pinpoint in my mind of what the original sin was and what the sin that's being added onto it was. So I felt that the original sin that the passage is talking about is basically the sin of not seeking God in and of itself. That's the basic command that God desired of his children, and these rebellious children, their hearts were not seeking after him. And then, of course, furthermore, they were seeking the counsel of all these false gods, basically. And then really that's why they're going to Egypt, and the passage kind of goes on to explain that. And it says to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh. So they're basically now not only not consulting the God they're supposed to be consulting, they've gone over and to seek advice from the gods of Pharaoh, or from Pharaoh himself. And and then the second thing that I thought to myself when I read this was, I just feel like this passage applies to the United States today. Like if you take every place where it says Egypt and you just switch it to the U.S., I feel like this passage is almost prophetic in talking about the U.S., that when you look at so many believers, not in this country but in other parts of the world, and not just believers and unbelievers, they kind of look to America because America is like the world superpower, and America has, probably the most prosperity altogether.
Like for a long time, like the most prolonged one for a while.
Yeah, and all the nations in the world kind of look to the U.S. as this is who you want on your side, and this is the one that we should consider. And I have that feeling that even Christians who live in other nations kind of have that mentality. Like it's probably true in Nigeria, right? Would you say? Yeah. And it's almost like they've forgotten that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that it's the God that you're serving.
That's true.
And Egypt was in that same position at that point in history, where Egypt was the superpower of the world, and all the nations were looking at the Egyptians. They have all this advanced, they have all this development, all this economic strength. Let's go get their advice, and see what they would have us do, as opposed to seeking God at that time, which is what God is, what the prophet is basically talking about, that you guys are seeking after Pharaoh, and Pharaoh can't help you. So I really think that it's the same thing that we almost need to that all Christians need to remind themselves, especially even us that live in this nation, that the U.S. is not the standard. Our society is not the one that we should be consulting. We should be consulting, the Word of God. And if we don't want to get to that point where we're looking towards other sources, basically for counsel.
Well, it's always gonna be like a duality, isn't it? Like the world's always gonna have its own agenda and its own standards, and people who are like following God and following Christianity are always gonna have their own standards. It's never gonna be like if you're a Christian and you're looking to the standards of the world to decide like everything you're gonna do, then maybe you're not a Christian.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's like. Yeah, so it's always going to have its own standard, and then it's just the way.
And it's one of the things that creates confusion with people, as it did in the time of Egypt, is the fact that when you're focused on the flesh and you see prosperity among men, then you say to yourself, well, let me go seek advice from this person because this person is prospering.
Well, that's okay, but you don't have to take advice when it comes to everything.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no, I agree. I don't disagree. I didn't think that was a problem. But, to just seek that advice because you see somebody that's prospering, it's almost natural that when you see someone who's successful, you want to say to yourself, how did you get this way? Let me ask you what you did to succeed. And that's how we get caught in that danger. The Bible tells us that that the wicked are reserved for the day of destruction, right? I think that was in Job that I read that. And oftentimes what happens is when they haven't seen their end, it looks like they're in the position of advantage. And it's we can use it as a reminder to kind of tell us that, look, God wants us to know that we're the ones that are in the position of
advantage.
Yeah, and even more than that He is the source of all, of everything, and so we shouldn't be seeking to the counsel of men at any point.
It's true.
So yes. So I was just thinking about just how that really, the same scenario kind of plays out today, where a lot of people still have that same mentality, the Pharaoh, let's go seek the counsel of Pharaoh mentality, where you're looking at people who seem to have everything together, and then you want to ask them, how do you do it, so that I can do it that way. And God just commands us to never do that. That our hearts should always be set on Him for guidance. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
And if you look at Psalm 1 also, Psalm 1, he said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly.
Amen.
He said, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law does he meditate day and night. So God has never favored people, taking counsel from ungodly, which is what the passage we were reading, that they were looking up to Pharaoh and all that stuff. That's why God judged Israel. I mean, this was even Judah, rebellious Judah, to be crushed. That pretty much Isaiah was kind of pronouncing judgment unto them. Say, woe unto you. You are doing this, you are going against the way of God big time. And, and for that reason, God is going to punish you, pretty much.
Well, just like also God said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's and things like that. God is okay with you getting advice from the ungodly when it regards to things that have nothing to do with God. If you go to an ungodly accountant or an ungodly, as long
I don't think that passage applies in that way. But
yeah, I think you can. I guess I'm just trying to say you can learn some things from them about how to be successful, some logical things, but not anything deep.
From the ungodly?
Yeah, I'm saying counsel. I'm saying
that's no scripture. No. There's nothing.
That passage, the way they use that passage, I don't know exactly what you're trying to say, but the way they use that passage, it wouldn't apply in that way, because basically that was when Jesus was saying, just kind of appease them, because they were asking him to pay his taxes. They were asking Jesus to pay his taxes. And Jesus was basically teaching the lesson of don't create conflict, like where it's unnecessary. If you can just hand them some money, and then go about your business.
So maybe that's not the correct passage to use.
Yeah.
I don't know what the correct passage to use is, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that like you can take something from someone that is unrelated to something spiritual, like a boss or a teacher of some sort that is teaching you something. You can take their counsel with regard to things that are not misleading you. You can't just say that, well, if somebody who's ungodly say 2 + 2 + 4, you can't say it's not equals 4 because you're not a Christian. Do you see what I mean? Like I'm saying,
truth is truth.
Yeah,
that regardless.
Just not with regard to things that are like meaningful in life. Like if they tell you, oh, this is how you should conduct, like how to raise your kids or how to conduct your marriage, then you shouldn't take advice about stuff like that from them because that would be crazy.
So I think it
depends on the kind of what the counsel is about. If it's about like,
I think that we would all agree that the truth is the truth, regardless of whether it comes out of the mouth of a man of God or in some cases of a man who's not of God, because God does, I can't think of a clear example, but I'm sure I could probably come up with one where God does use people who are not his children to tell the truth.
And he also uses them to bless people who are of God.
Yeah, and that's true as well. I don't know if that applies as much to your situation, but certainly someone who's not a Christian can say something that's true. I think that we've all kind of observed that. And so...
But you wouldn't want to take real, life advice from them. Is I guess
but
what you're saying.
I think that there's still kind of an overlap that it's almost as if God is using that person in that moment, even though they're not a child of God. That's what I would think. So I would say that the better thing to say is that God can use people who are not Christian to kind of speak through you, to kind of speak the truth or to give you sound advice. But I wouldn't say that you can that it's okay to kind of take practical or to take advice from someone who's not a Christian on itself. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, God can use somebody. I think God can use somebody who's not a Christian. But I wouldn't say that we should ever just kind of accept advice from somebody who's not a Christian, even if it's not, even if it's like, for example, the mathematical, it seems almost absurd, but I don't think that that's what the Bible teaches us, that we should just accept. Of course, we know that that's true, so, we always abide in truth, and the Bible commands that, but we shouldn't just accept it. I don't think the Bible gives us an example of kind of seeking counsel of somebody who's not a child of God under any. In fact, the Bible gives us a lot of examples of well, not like conversational examples, but the Bible talks about like we should lend and not borrow, and we should, it kind of frames the idea that Christians should always be the leaders, that we should always be in the position of leadership, and that we should never go to another group of people and try to get things from them. And I've spoken about this in the past, that it's actually, it falls back on the same national thing, is that it's one of the reasons, it's one of the things that created the biggest problem in Christianity in the U.S. Because people just kind of yielded as they saw that, the workplace and the community and so many things were engaging in behaviors that were not Christian. So many Christians just kind of said, well,
I can't control everyone.
Yeah, and
so
my boss, my boss is now, embracing this and I can't take a stand because I don't want to lose my job or because of this, and they just kind of little by little just yielded more and more to the point where now as a Christian you're functioning under heathen leadership, which God condemns. So I think that I kind of see that as the end game of even when it comes to little things, of just kind of being okay with taking advice from people who are not Christian. So I think of the story of Joseph now that I'm thinking about it, that Pharaoh was in the position of leadership, obviously, but it didn't really work out that way. So that's not even a good example, because Pharaoh went to Joseph ultimately. I mean, Joseph was under his authority, and he was under Potiphar's authority. But in each case, Joseph never sought their counsel. They ended up coming to him. So yeah.
I mean, I think that you definitely have a good point, because even when it comes to practical things, for example, a boss of yours could tell you something, could be like, okay, here's what we're doing this at this time, we're doing that at that time, and it could be telling you to like, oh, when this person comes in, do this, and that person could be a child of God, and it could be telling you when they come in, you do this and this and this, and if you're somebody who just goes along with whatever the authority says, because you think that that's what you're supposed to do when it comes to everything, then you're basically becoming a tool in the hand of the devil, because you don't question it, you just play along.
I agree. I wasn't thinking about it like that, but yeah, you can be manipulated into doing
things.
bidding
Else. So
for
even
things
just
you don't
on your
even.
job and your day-to-day and your regular job, you really have to seek God and not become a tool in the hand of the devil to just get part of, if you're someone who doesn't question it, you're like, well, they pay me $15 an hour, therefore if they tell me I'm supposed to do this and this, then I guess I'll go. That's insane.
Yeah.
Because because the thing is, if God's gonna punish you, he will. He'll punish. Would you say so? Would you say God will punish someone if they just go along with like something that seems iffy that the boss asks them to do, but they don't even question it, they just figure they're being paid, so whatever.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're definitely setting yourself up for eventually suffering consequences.
Yeah. So I think in that sense
so.
You're right, that if you consider yourself to be a Christian at all, then don't just go along with just like, whatever agenda, especially if there's reason for you to question that agenda at least a little bit. Then don't do it.
Yeah.
Then pray about it.
Another thing I was going to say is that, look, to be on the safe side, as a child, it's up to God. God is above everybody.
Yeah.
God can use anybody. He even use an animal to speak to a prophet when the prophet was very stubborn.
Yeah. That's an even better example. Good. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That is up to God. God can. So you don't have the power that God has. At the very point, an animal that cannot speak, God made him speak because he is God.
Right.
You get my point? So the best thing is to be on the safe side. Let us, as a child of God, just live by the word of God. If God wants some believer to come and speak to you, it's up to God. He can use the believer to talk, but you cannot do that.
Yeah.
You cannot begin to use. You know what I mean? You cannot take the position of God and be operating like God is doing. What God can do, we cannot do it. So the best thing is to say, when the word of God said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel, I would rather not take counsel from anyone. If God wants to give me counsel, he can send somebody, I will listen, So, but I cannot turn around and say, oh, okay, it must be, God must be speaking for me, it must be, I can ask him because he's this, is that. No. You don't have the power to do that.
So basically, what you are saying, to be clear, is that you should not chase after the counsel of the ungodly. But that does not mean God cannot use somebody. Okay.
God can.
You have to be clear.
God
because
can.
Sorry, they all had to differentiate. What does that really mean? What you really mean is koma le counsel, koma lo bimo. But only send koma whisper. Koma wan bi koto wa koma wa But that's different.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's different. Since we don't have that power to be on the safe side, let's just keep within the scriptures.
I understand. That makes sense.
So we don't end up making mistakes.
Got it.
So
got it.
Okay. Okay. So let me show you guys.
Video,
so it's not a video. I just wanted to. So I just put these three verses together. We've talked about this before, but I want to talk about it one more time. And I just want to kind of clarify some things. Well, not even clarify, just talk about it. So, is it on? Yeah, I got everything on remote.
You got it all rigged.
Okay.
How do you do that?
I had to buy like a little device that you can see it on. It's on the switch. But yeah, it'll let you control it from your phone. I found it on Amazon. So yeah. Okay, so let me turn this side. Okay, so I just put these three verses together. So this is Matthew 15. And it says, not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man. And that's in Matthew 15, verse 11. And then Mark 7, verse 15, it says, there is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. And then in Luke 11, verse 39, it doesn't really say it very clearly, but it says, "Now do ye Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. Ye fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also?" So these are the only three passages that cover the topic of clean and unclean food. This is the same scene. The Gospel of John doesn't talk about it at all. It's not addressed in that gospel. So within these three passages, I just wanted to kind of go over the same thing that I was talking about with consistency between the Old and the New Testament. And, this presents some things that are really interesting to us. So I'm just going to kind of go over it and say what I think about it. So in Matthew 15, it says, "Not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man." So this passage is interesting because it's basically saying, when you read it at just pure face value, what is it saying?
He's saying that
Just Matthew 15, yeah. When you just read that, what is it saying face value? Like, what would you guys say? Okay, so I'm reading that and basically thinking to myself, it's saying that there's nothing that you eat that defiles you.
Yeah.
It's what you say that defiles you.
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
Because it comes from your heart.
So, so that's how I interpret that passage.
That's correct.
Mark 7, it's a much more vague statement. As Mark accounted it, he said, "There's nothing from without a man,
There's nothing from outside.
nothing from outside of you that entering into you can defile you. But the things which come out of you, those are they that defile you." So that is a broader statement. It's saying that there's nothing from outside of you that when it enters you defiles you. But it's the things that come out of you that defile you. So that it doesn't give us anything very specific. And neither does Matthew. It doesn't tell us that it's food. But
you assume food with that one.
But yeah,
You assume food with that one. Because it talks about the mouth.
and it talks about the mouth.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say that it has to enter into. It's just saying nothing that goes into the mouth defiles you, but what comes out of your mouth
15 is too
defiles you.
broad.
Yeah, especially this issue came up
Yeah.
when they were saying that the disciples don't wash hands before they eat.
Yeah, that's what
So
all
that's
three
why
is.
we need
Yeah,
food.
and so the thing is, when we look at the Old Testament, the Old Testament has laws on food. We can't deny that.
Yeah, that's correct.
So when Jesus says, I didn't put that passage on there, but we know that Jesus says, "None of the law shall change, not one jot, not one tittle." When Jesus makes that statement, we have to, in order for us to know that the Word of God is consistent, we have to apply it consistently. So when we look at this, we can't say to ourselves, okay, nothing that you eat defiles you. That would be in clear contradiction to the Old Testament, wouldn't it? I mean, I have no other way of interpreting that. That if Matthew was saying nothing that goes into the mouth defiles you, then that's the exact opposite of Old Testament law.
Okay.
Is that not?
Yeah.
Because the Old Testament says you shall not eat.
Yeah, it says don't eat this, don't eat that. So I see an opposition with that interpretation. So the only thing that I can say is that if I'm going to look at this passage and make sense out of it, I have to take it in a more vague interpretation. So when I read that and I say, "Not that which goeth into the mouth defileth the man, but that which come out of the mouth, this defileth the man," I look at that as a statement of scope. That's the only way that I can even make sense out of it. If I'm reading the entire scripture from beginning up to that point, is he's basically saying that the things that are really going to defile you are the things that you say. That's what Matthew is basically saying. And so the things that you're eating, that's not going to defile you very much. That it's the things that are actually coming out of your mouth. Now it doesn't say that. It says that, I mean, if we read it and we just take it at face value, it's basically saying that anything that goes into your mouth doesn't defile you. But we can't accept, I don't think that we can accept that interpretation of that statement.
Okay.
I think that the only way to make sense of what Matthew said is to look at it as a broader statement of Matthew basically saying it's the things that you actually say, the things that are actually coming out of your mouth that are really defiling you. The things that are going into your mouth, they're not really defiling you that much.
Right, okay.
That's what I would say. Okay. So then we go to Mark, and he says, "There's nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man." So I've spoken about this before. I wasn't actually going to bring that up, but the last time I was spoken about this, I was talking about prostaglandins. I was talking about inflammatory chemicals. So the reason they call prostaglandins is because they were discovered as a secretion of the prostate gland itself. Okay? And the reason I bring that one up specifically is because that secretion, it's secreted from the body. And it's one of the main chemicals that deals with any type of inflammatory reaction in the body. So anytime you have like any type of inflammation, that typically you're gonna have prostaglandins being present there. So it gives us kind of an insight into the fact that that's something that's defiling. Do you see what I mean? So I look at this and I see it as a much broader statement, that this is basically saying that the things that come out of you, all of those things defile you. So I see it as, yes, it doesn't negate Matthew, and we can't allow it to do so. So we would have to, Mark has to be in agreement with Matthew. So Matthew gives us kind of a more narrow explanation, and then Mark is basically saying, look, there's nothing at all from outside of you that when it goes inside of you, it defiles you. But it's the things that come, it's not when it comes out of you, but it's the things that actually come from the body that defile the body. So, how does that agree with the Old Testament passage? Let me say what I think. Okay. And I talked about this last week. I don't know, for me, when we were talking about this. All of the things that are unclean in the Old Testament, if you read through the list, all of those animals and all of those unclean creatures, they, like I said, they're scavengers. They feed on the excrement of other creations.
Like vultures and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, we know through just basic physics and physiology that if something eats something, it stays within the body, or parts of it leave, but it mingles with that creature's body, obviously. Like any creature that eats something, that thing that it ate is part of that creature, at least temporarily, and usually some amount of it stays within that creature. So, to me, this kind of clearly explains what was going on in the Old Testament. That it wasn't that those creatures themselves, well, no, let me not say that. But the issue was that the things that were coming out of the body are being consumed by those creatures, which further defiles those creatures. Now, when we really examine this, and we really follow this all the way through, in Mark chapter 7, what are the things that come out of the body? Sweat, right? Urine,
blood, poop.
Feces,
Yeah.
hair follicles,
Yeah.
skin follicles, theoretically anything, okay? When you really, and if you start breaking it down clinically, I mean, because urine has glucose in it, blood has protein in it. When you really start breaking it down, you can just basically say organic. Anything that's of organic origin is coming from the body. And so, that's how I came to the conclusion that Mark is really, that if you really follow this thought process all the way through, all food is unclean. Do you see what I'm saying? Because everything has some level of organic origin. So everything has some level of uncleanness.
Right, which is why
to
fasting is advised. Sometimes.
Exactly.
Which is why periods
And I felt like that's exactly why Jesus said for certain demons it requires fasting and prayer, because while the prayer, of course, is very important, the fasting further sanctifies you. Yeah, it makes sure that there is no defilement that's entering into your body. So through the combination of both, it gives you the ability to cast that demon out, basically. So I think that this passage is really just basically saying that, you know, it's saying what it's saying, but you kind of have to follow it all the way through,
Right.
and realize that the things that come out of the body also go back in. Like I've said so many times, like the things that come out in some way, shape, or another usually come back in.
Right.
And it's not just true with food in this case, which is why I really agree with, I feel like this is the most comprehensive statement, because we know that carbon dioxide is toxic to the human body. That's what we exhale. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I've thought of other examples too, but I mean, this passage seems to explain something very, very big that appears to be consistent over and over and over again. And yeah, and it gives clarity to the statement of why it's so important to fast, because anything that you eat defiles you. Now, it doesn't defile you as much as according to Matthew, I would say it doesn't defile you as much as what you would say, as much as the things that you're doing, but there's still that small amount of defilement, I think. Okay, so then we go to Luke chapter 11. It doesn't really give us a whole lot of insight into it.
It's like the big pointy outside of the cup and platter. But
Yeah, he's basically just saying, yeah, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also. That's basically the only part that kind of addresses the issue. But that's basically just saying that God made the outside of the body and the inside of the body.
Yeah, they have an emphasis on making the outside perfect, but they're not taking care of it.
Yeah, that you're focusing on one thing arbitrarily when both things have the same maker.
A lot of this is referring to the human heart. He said the human heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. So a lot of what Christ is saying is that, look, our heart has to be right before God.
Yeah.
It's just trying to tell them that what is more important is your heart.
Yeah.
Because a lot of evil, murder, this, that, all comes from the heart.
Yeah. But you know what? Even
it's not from food stuff.
Even in the broader sense, I understand that they're like, you know, the idea of all these passages say is just kind of like, don't be so concerned with, oh, are you eating on the Sabbath? Are you eating this? Are you doing that? But be more concerned with the nature, like with where your heart is at. I get it. But I even think that so much of where your heart is at still has to do with what you consume too. As far as like, you can't just read just anything, you can't watch you can't absorb just anything into who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think
that defiles you too. Why? Because it'll change what's coming out of you eventually.
Yeah,
like if
I
you
agree.
listen to something long enough, you'll start saying
and and that those passages, I think they further they do go back over the concept of reaping and sowing too, in that of course the Bible teaches us that what you sow you reap, and so it's basically saying, look, if you sow uncleanness, so it's talking about when you sow uncleanness into the body, that you're gonna reap some consequence of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would agree. So one of the things that I started thinking about in addition to this, that I spoke about a long time ago when we had a group of students was, there was one day where I was planning on devoting myself to prayer the entire day. I always remind Mommy about this, and I told her that for some reason, like, something kept blocking me, and then the whole week I felt like God was trying to explain something to me about dialysis. Remember when I talked about this a few months ago? And then that was when you brought up the passage where it said, this kind goeth not out except by fasting and prayer. So when we're going back to the concept of dialysis, like when you look at what's happening, like their kidneys shut down, and so of course it has to be cleaned every couple of days. And like I was saying before, they're not eating anything that's crazy contaminated. They're just eating regular foods, and through that process of eating regular foods, there's so much toxins building up in their body that they will die if they don't get it filtered out. And so I said to myself, let's okay, that further reinforces the idea that food does have a level of uncleanness, because if it wasn't unclean, it wouldn't have to be constantly be getting cleaned out. That's one thing. But I said to myself, let's think about the condition in and of itself. Okay, so what was I to say? Kidney failure. The top two causes of kidney failure is hypertension, number one. Number two is diabetes. Daddy had problems with high blood pressure, right? We know that. Yeah. And
his kidney was shutting down.
Really?
really,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, when the high blood pressure was shutting down his kidneys.
Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, yeah.
Because his blood pressure was constantly high.
Yeah.
And one
So-
of his doctor was
We hate to criticize, but he's a perfect example because we all know him well. And so we kind of have a decent idea of what his problems were in terms of where in his life does he have sin, how could that be impacting him, okay? Daddy had a problem with getting angry. He confessed that out of his own mouth with me. It was the one, when we were talking about sexual sin, and then, Daddy, he brought up, I have my problem, and he was like, I don't understand why I always get so angry. He said that to me. And that's obvious to anybody who's paying attention, that Daddy gets very angry very easily. And typically when you get angry, what do? You curse people, right? I mean, if something made you angry, then I guess you just curse the situation, but if someone else made you angry, you curse the person. When we sin, what does God do? God punishes us, of course, if we're his child. Okay? So when we look at the issue of high blood pressure that he developed, how do I want to draw this connection clearly? It's not even an uncommon scientific medical research statement that anger, strong emotion, causes blood pressure to rise. That's something that's been proven in study after study after study, right? Like, most people generally understand that when someone gets angry, their blood pressure goes up, okay? And that creates problems. Let's interpret that as God handing out punishment, because high blood pressure is not a good thing, right? And we know that those two things are very connected. That when someone is getting angry, they're cursing other people, they develop high blood pressure themselves. That's a form of defilement right there. When it's something that I spoke about too a long time ago, but when you curse someone, you do injury to that person. Like you're having an impact according to the Word of God. I forget how exactly I forget exactly how I explained that one. But yeah, the Bible teaches us that when you curse someone, I kind of walked it backwards. So the Bible tells us that sexual sin is the only sin that's a sin against your own body. And so when you sin in any other way except sexual sin, you're sinning against someone else's body. So we can just basically accept that when you curse someone, you're obviously sinning against that person's body. And so if it affects you, it's because God is punishing you, not because you did anything to yourself, right? I mean, that's the logical progression of that interpretation. If sexual sin is the only sin against your own body, anytime you sin against other people, the only way that you would suffer consequences is if God is now punishing you for the sin that you committed.
Because our body is the temple of God.
Yeah. Okay, so when you curse someone, God then punishes you, which causes, let's say in that situation, it causes that high blood pressure problem. Over time, you become so defiled through the cursing of other people that what happens to your own body, that God has been cursing you if you're a child of God the entire time, your kidneys start to shut down. Okay. Do you see how the punishment is now kind of being amplified? Because your kidneys clear out your defilement. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like the food that you would normally eat that would defile you, your kidneys would function to clear that out. Okay. So after you've constantly been defiling other people, God's been constantly punishing you, and now your kidneys are starting to shut down as further punishment for the sin that you keep committing. In other words, you are now losing your ability to even sanctify.
Actually, what happened is that when your kidneys, when you
What were you going to
anger is a stressor.
Yeah.
Yeah. When the body cannot handle any stress, because stress constricts vessel. It's a vessel constrictor. So anything that constricts vessel is going to shoot up your pressure.
But why? That's the issue. Is it the anger in and of itself?
The cause of it is the anger.
Because it's like you're getting heated.
Is the anger.
Right, but from do you guys see what I'm saying?
I know, from a
We understand. Yeah,
perspective.
we understand the mechanism of what's happening. You get angry. The anger causes your blood vessels to constrict. But what I'm saying is, if we inject this from a spiritual standpoint,
You're saying
the anger in and of itself is coming out of your heart.
Right.
Right? Typically, it's directed towards another person. Typically, it's directed towards another person, and so that anger has now come out of your heart. And now there's a punishment. From a spiritual standpoint, there's a punishment that needs to be handed
What
out.
if the person did something that warrants the anger? That's the part that
That's not what the Bible
completely
teaches.
left
You know
out.
that.
You've left out completely, like.
What about the other person? The Bible doesn't teach that ever.
I know that, but I know the Bible teaches that vengeance is the Lord's, and that we shouldn't take vengeance on someone else, and that you should leave the wicked alone, that God will get them. I get that, but it's still natural to react.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's not natural. I'm not condemning. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just pointing out this is what happens. I could care less about whether or not it's natural or not. I'm just saying that the act of getting angry, that's something that's coming out of your heart. That's a sin that's coming out of your heart. That sin now has to be punished. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I believe that's what's happening spiritually within that process. And then
But God Himself.
over time, well, let me just finish. And then over time, through that constant process of cursing people being cursed, cursing people being cursed, the blood pressure remains high with such a level of frequency that it starts to shut down the kidneys, which is your God-ordained system for cleaning out your defilement. See how that almost falls perfectly in line with the fact that, look, what you're doing to defile you has now gotten to the point where it's defiling you to the point where you can no longer undo your own defilement. And it's almost how God is kind of walking you through that process. Do you see what I'm saying?
Okay. So as children of God, what are we supposed to do?
Well, obviously we don't sin. I'm just kind of explaining that when we look at how that process is playing itself out, we begin to understand that it shouldn't surprise us the link between high blood pressure and kidney failure, when you understand the function of the kidneys, is to clean out the defilement that you eat in food. That through that act of defiling yourself, or God defiling you because of what you're doing to other people, that eventually you start losing your body's function to clear out the things that would defile you. And so, okay.
So you're just
And then,
physical and spiritual, they're almost working together.
yeah, but I think it's important for us to kind of look at the details of it too, to kind of to develop an understanding, you know, of the things that are happening. I mean, God tries to explain things to us about I believe so, that God wants us to know this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you need to do to correct it. So if we examine the things that are happening, I think it's important for us to kind of look at the details of it, because I think that the details will point out to you the specifics of what it is that's going on.
The solution is to never get angry.
Anger is
Yeah, I mean, be slow to anger.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Anger is
It's natural, yeah.
It's a natural thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody on the planet Earth who
Yeah.
can never, ever,
Well, Jesus
ever in
did
their
that.
life be angry. I don't know.
Jesus
Jesus
did
seemed
that.
pretty angry when he went.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, okay, so
all
that's
those
true.
people in this temple
That's true, that's
who were-
true.
who were like,
And so we can't say that.
Tax collectors.
Yeah.
or
tax
whatever.
collectors.
He was
that
pretty angry
pretty
at those guys.
angry.
Yeah.
And it was a thing that he needed to be angry about.
I agree.
Sometimes you need.
I
Because
agree.
you need to do
So,
something.
okay,
You
so
need
let
an
me,
impetus for
let me adjust. I don't, and that's a good point. I don't believe that the Bible teaches us to just never ever get angry.
No.
I don't believe that the Bible
Some
teaches.
are angry but do not
Yeah.
sin.
Yeah.
And so whatever that means.
So how do you be angry?
Well, he said don't let the
So,
sun
yeah.
go down on your
And you're-
anger.
yeah, do not
Yeah.
let
So
sun
be
go
quick
down.
to
He's
anger.
kind of like be mad, but don't be mad for long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Be mad for like a
may-
really short
so
time.
Oh,
Maybe
look at
it's
our-
okay. So maybe
yeah.
it's okay to be angry, but to
Yeah.
be pathologically
But don't
angry
Yeah.
is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to, which I could see that, but that's like, yeah.
What
Just
does-
don't stay mad.
What-
Be
what
mad a
does-
little bit, but
What,
don't
what
stay
does the
mad.
Bible say about God? He said his anger endured for a moment.
A moment. His
Yeah.
anger endures for a
God-
moment, but
God
his
get
mercy
angry,
lasts a
he gets-
lifetime.
Yeah.
Where does
Yeah, his
Does it
anger
say that?
endured for
Yeah.
a moment. Yeah.
what does it say that?
Oh, you can
Just
Google,
Google it. Yeah, Google it. Sorry.
That's just the scripture. His anger endured
Yes,
for a moment.
but his
Yeah.
mercy lasts his lifetime.
God's anger doesn't prolong. His
I don't
anger
remember that
endured for a
passage,
moment.
but yeah, that's
Google
I
it.
think it's
Okay.
one of the Psalms.
Yeah.
Says his anger endured for a moment. So, and
Yeah,
that's what we
and it says he's slow to anger. I know that for sure.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
so that's the thing. Like,
Angry
we
do
can
not
never
sin.
like ever be like not mad, but it's like maybe you just like don't stay
Don't
mad
let the sun
because
go
sometimes
down
you need
for
a
you.
little bit of like a little bit of be irritated to do something
but,
about something.
yeah.
Sometimes I feel like if
Yeah.
I was never mad about certain things, a lot of proactive things that I'm like, oh,
Do you remember when my
I
heart
wouldn't
started
do
racing?
anything.
Your heart.
Do you remember when my heart started racing in here when I got mad at you,
Oh.
like a few weeks ago?
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I didn't notice that.
You
See,
don't remember that?
One good thing
Oh.
about Daddy is this. God bless him.
Yeah.
Daddy gets angry, but he's not like me. He gets over his anger so quick.
He doesn't stay mad. Yeah.
No, I mean, his anger is like God's. He gets over his anger so quick. What am I mean? The second day, third day,
You're
3
still
weeks.
mad.
Well, I'm still mad. That's my own.
I think
My
that's
own
a
is,
woman thing
my own is
sometimes.
bad.
I think women stay mad longer.
So I like his own anger because as of to Babino, right and then, the next minute you
He
see him
forgot
laughing,
about
he
it,
forget
yeah.
about it. I love that. I
Yeah.
have to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not
Well,
like that.
nobody is perfect.
So
That's the only
nobody's
that's the thing.
perfect.
We all
It's
have,
true.
you
But
know.
don't,
I think
we
that's
didn't know
fair.
your heart
I
was
think-
raising last week.
I think,
Oh.
I think
You didn't know that?
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Yeah, you
How
did.
would you know
Yeah.
that?
No,
You-
I,
you-
well, I
you
could
made the
tell because he
comment.
was so intense.
Yeah,
I
you-
think-
you-
Oh,
you're
I
the one
just
that made the
said that
comment.
I'm too angry.
Yeah.
No, not last week.
What did I say?
No, it wasn't last
2
week.
weeks ago before
It was a
Mara got
long
here.
time ago. This was
Yeah.
the day when I stopped work early. We went to go
Yeah, we
see.
see Sama and stuff
Yeah,
like that. Yeah,
yeah.
you got really worked up.
Yeah, you made the comment. You were like, oh, you look at your breathing and look at this and that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah.
Yeah,
So
you
you
got
remember.
really intense.
So, yeah.
You got really intense.
So I was just bringing that up because I don't even know why I said that, but for some reason I wanted to say it. But anyways, okay. So the other thing that I want to talk about that I want to mention before is the number 2 cause of kidney failure is diabetes.
Okay, I didn't know that one.
Yeah. So, and then we look at diabetes itself. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated because then you have type 1 diabetes, which
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to say exactly what causes that. But we know at least with type 2 diabetes, well,
It's diet.
type 1 is caused by a number of different things, so it gets really kind of weird, I guess. And sometimes it happens on its own, yeah. Okay, but type 2 diabetes, we know specifically what causes that. Type 2 diabetes is caused by people who eat too much sugar on a consistent basis. So,
No, if I change the different things, so we're putting different outfits on.
yeah. So it's a form of gluttony is really what it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if someone is eating sugary foods all the time and their blood sugar never has time to recover and they're just constantly eating more and more sugar, we would have to say that there's a sin there. That this person is a glutton, that this person has demonstrated no ability to have moderation, no ability to deny themselves, that they're basically just yielding to their flesh every time they desire something, they're going after it in that instant. Okay, and so then they develop type 2 diabetes. That in and of itself begins to create, it's almost the same progression in the sense that it's telling you what the original sin was, right? That there's something that you know, well,
Oh, your whole sermon today is about like if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have kidney failure and hypertension, it's because you are sinning. That's
Yeah.
basically your message.
it's
today.
true. It's true though. But
you're either sinning gluttony or you're sinning of anger or you're sinning. It's all because you're a sinner. That's why you have these.
That
And
sin
so-
can cause a lot of problems,
yeah.
both physical and spiritual.
And so, you know, so yeah, the first part of the development of diabetes, that kind of is the first defilement, because you're essentially sinning in that case against God. Is that you're
Like
not
eating too much? Eating too much is a sin against God?
well, yeah, because of what it represents. The gluttony
represents
represents yielding to the flesh.
No
It represents
self-control.
it represents a lack of self-denial. That's why the fasting represents
Like it is
a level of sanctification of well.
She just says I'm a glutton, that I just eat constantly.
So, anyways,
I didn't say that.
She just said that.
so the fasting represents like the exact opposite of when somebody is in a state of fasting, that they're kind of totally devoted to the God to the point where they don't even pursue food at all.
They don't even
So
eat food.
we can kind of see at the opposite end as someone who's constantly eating, as someone who's so not focused on spiritual that that they're just yielding to their flesh, and so there's a sin kind of within that activity itself.
And you also forget
So-
that like sometimes the food becomes a source of comfort. A lot of people who get fatties, like when someone breaks
Yeah,
up with
that's
them.
what happens.
Someone breaks up with them and they eat and
the
eat
flesh.
and eat and eat because it makes them feel better.
Stress.
Well, that's yeah,
Yeah, it makes them distressed.
and that's the same concept, right? The flesh lusts against the spirit. So when you yield to it, when you yield to the flesh in any way, then the flesh starts taking over, and you just start doing whatever the flesh wants you to do.
It's like drinking alcohol.
Yeah,
Yeah, same
Like
thing.
anything.
Some people
Yeah,
drink when
Yeah.
someone breaks up with them too. Yeah,
Yeah.
they either eat food or they drink alcohol.
yeah,
That's the same
and that's so funny that you bring that one up, because anyway, it's almost the exact same thing, because that one's with the liver, but it creates the same problem because the liver filters out those toxins, and so when you're constantly drinking, that's how the sin is being punished, is it starts to destroy your liver, and now the toxins that the liver was filtering out are no longer being filtered out because you're at that point where you can't remove your own defilement.
It's like
So
saturated.
it's the same, yeah. So it's the same thing. It's almost like you can see like where you're at in your progression in sin. Like the diabetes itself is a problem, is because now your body isn't filtering out that toxin that you're putting into it anymore. It's not dealing with it, and then the diabetes starts to affect your kidneys. Over the long run, and so it's like the more you continue to defile yourself, eventually you lose your ability to cleanse your body of anything,
Yeah.
to kind of to rid your body of any form of defilement
Yeah.
in and of itself. So yeah, I guess the point that I wanted to just kind of make was that when we look at these things, like if we start to really compare the Word of God and look at the specifics of what's happening in people's lives, it gives us insight. I know people always use the passage in Matthew. Well, I don't know if it's Matthew. No, I think it's in. Anyways, it's in one of the Gospels where there was the blind man, and his followers, or the Pharisees, walked up and said, who sinned? Was it this man or his father, for that he was born blind? And I feel like that passage has been taken to the point where, and then, well, let me finish. And then Jesus said, neither this man nor his father sinned, but that the works of God, yeah, something about the works of God being glorified through him. And people have kind of taken that passage to the point where now we think that no diseases have anything to do with sin, and I don't think that that's what that passage was intended for at all. In fact, I believe that that passage is really exactly what it says, that in that moment it was to point something out to the Pharisees. That that person was born blind for that specific purpose.
Yeah.
Number one, to speak to the Pharisees in how they themselves are blind. And number two, to point out in specific detail how they're blind, because what the Pharisees were doing in that moment, what the Pharisees were doing at that time is that anytime somebody was sick, they would say, "Oh, stay away from that person. They're a sinner, or their parents were sinners." Yeah, and it became
sinners or their sinners.
and it became just kind of like a judgment and condemnation contest of, "Oh, stay away from that sinner. Or, look at those person. The parents are sinners. We don't want to be around those people that are sinners." And that's the exact opposite. And through that passage, Jesus was basically saying, "Look, what you are doing is actually worse than the person who has this affliction." Through whether it be their own sin or through something that was inherited from the parents, what you're doing now in basically declaring yourself superior because I'm healthy and I haven't been punished by God, and look at you, sinner, get out of my face, that's actually even worse. But we've kind of gone to the complete opposite extreme, where now no one wants to consider the fact that they're being punished by sin when they're sick.
So, do you know there's this preacher? I'm gonna send him I'm gonna send him your link to him. He has like no arms and no legs, and I don't know if you've heard. He's Australian.
He was on TBN.
Yeah, he's incredible. Sometimes I think God creates infirmities in people just to showcase, like.
I think that.
No, but Joseph's still saying the
same
thing. He's saying that it's gone to the extreme because Joseph is saying that no matter what, he still believes that affliction is because of sin.
Yeah, I believe so. It's either handed out from the parents to the child. It's not always the person who committed the sin, and now he has. Obviously, if he was born with it, obviously it came from the parents. That's clear.
So he's saying it always is, but I'm just saying like.
But God can use it in a big way, even though God can still.
Yeah, what I was saying with that passage with the blind man is that the blind man was really just that one instant for God to teach that one lesson about blindness.
Yeah.
And not saying that like some people are born blind naturally. I'm not sure if they are or if they're not. But that passage, that instant of that man. Well, actually, no. Let me go back and say I am saying that. I believe that if someone is born blind today, they're born blind either because they sin or because their parents sin. That's what I believe. In that instant, where the man was blind and Jesus said nobody sinned, it was because God needed to teach that lesson of you don't condemn people and run away from them and kind of look down on them in your heart because they're have an illness because of sin.
I don't think that you can know that for every single person that is blind in the world, because I think
that's what the Bible teaches. That's why I said that.
Well, no, because if you're going to use the example of the blind man, that Jesus chose to use him to teach that lesson.
Yeah.
You don't know what lesson then Jesus is trying to teach with that blind man you're seeing across the street.
Well, mommy's saying
you
that.
You don't know. But that's
so
what
you're
I'm
saying that God is going to heal. Okay, I see your point. I see your point.
God can do whatever He wants.
So He's going to. Okay, that's true.
Yes.
That's true.
So that's why I'm saying that. Your conclusion as an absolute is wrong.
I agree.
Because it assumes that you know with absolute certainty
that God isn't going to use
what God is wanting to intend for that person, and nobody knows that.
I agree.
So when you see somebody who has an affliction, it does provoke deep thought, and the thought may be, okay, yes, this may be related to sin in somebody's life, but it may really be related to a purpose that God is trying to serve in this person's life.
That's true. That's good.
How can I know the difference?
That's hard.
That's true.
Only God knows the difference.
And further,
I cannot react to them as a sinner because I actually don't know.
Amen. And it reinforces the same point though that I was making, which is that God doesn't want us to kind of operate with that mentality. Regardless of whether it was sin, the parents' sin, it's not our job to condemn the person. But you can't say that it was because of sin.
It could be a parent's sin, could the person's sin, or nobody's sin.
That's true.
And God is trying to do something with that person's life that you just don't know because God hasn't told you because He decides who He tells.
Tell you which case is this one. Like Jesus told them that, look, this case is different. God is not going to be able to tell us all the cases different in the world.
Yes.
But Jesus was able to tell them
in that one, because he was there.
Okay, that's true. But here's what we can say.
I think we all agree.
Yeah, we do.
Here's what we can say, though.
We have to think deeply about these things. Bless you.
So here's what we can say, though. If there is sin within that person's life, or within the life or sin that's being handed out from the parents to that person, it's going to manifest itself in some type of condition, in some type of problem.
Maybe, but I don't know if that's another absolute statement that presumes that.
Well, I think that's what. I think that's what the Bible clearly teaches.
Every sin is going to be manifested like that.
No, I think that's what the Bible teaches, though.
Some people's sins are covered.
What does it say that?
Before time, that say lay hands on no man suddenly. That was Paul talking to Timothy. He said some people, their sin are manifest quick. Some people, they are prolonged.
And then it also
they are not exposed right away.
People do get better.
That was Timothy.
I mean, like, I'm just saying, people there's so I don't know that I don't know that we can be so absolute. I think we can think about it, and we can think about what God is trying to teach us about the nature of sin and how it manifests in our body, or may manifest in our body in some way. And I think that's not a bad lesson. But I don't know that we can be absolutely certain, because
It's
we are
hard.
limited
It's
by
hard
the
by the flesh.
by exactly. So these are good things to think about and to ponder and to know about. But I don't know that we can stand in certainty that we know how God is working in an exact way.
Well-
it doesn't say that we shouldn't think about it, and we shouldn't think about the sin in our lives.
I think
and
that too-
how to get rid of it, whether it's from anger or from whatever reason.
But we can be sure that God punishes sin,
That's
because the Bible says that in plain language.
Yeah, God also heals people in this world.
Right. But you know,
So I don't know.
on the first note, if there's sin that exists, it's being punished in some way, shape, or form. We know that to a certainty because that's written in plain.
It says
Yeah.
some men's sins are open beforehand, going before to judgment, and some men they follow after. See, it's not
Okay,
all
so
the
yeah.
yeah.
So
some
that's true.
Sins are covered.
So yeah, that's true. That's true.
And,
That's true.
and how is it? Is sin punished in this world?
Yeah,
is
or it could be punished.
later?
Yeah.
Is that what that
that's
means?
exactly. I think that's what that passage is basically
So
saying.
this is
That sin is
saying, like,
punished.
there's
That some people are punished right now,
punishment
some are punished later on. Yeah.
So they may
Yeah.
seem perfectly healthy.
Yeah,
but
they
it
may
means that
seem
all
healthy
healthy
to you.
people
But-
have no sin.
But their sin
it's
hasn't
not-
been punished.
it's not
Yeah.
like that.
That it's
Yeah,
some
things
are open and
some
some
are not.
are coming
Some
after.
are
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting.
So yeah, so that further adds complexity to it, but
But it's a complex thing.
we still
isn't it?
understand the basic that when
Right.
sin occurs, God is handing out punishment, and so
in whatever way He seems fit, whether in this
Yeah.
world or another world.
yeah, but we can take that into consideration that
Thank God.
when we see somebody, and not to condemn them, but to consider that there is that possibility that there's something specific going on with this person that God is revealing through this condition, and yeah,
Right.
and
It's just hard to know
So-
if that person is meant to be to teach a lesson to the world that the world really
Yeah, we
needs to
don't
listen
know.
to, or if it's related to sin. It's just really hard to know, when you see.
As a
So you
human
have
being.
to sort
Unless
of,
God tells you.
unless God tells you in that moment
that
for
this
that
is the-
specific
this is the
person,
situation with this
right?
person.
This is the
This is the
situation with that
situation.
person.
Mm.
Otherwise,
Mm.
you kind of
Yeah.
have to go around the
And whatever
world.
God is trying to do with their lives, you're not going to realize it
Oh,
in the short run. You're going to realize it in the
Bishop,
long
go
term.
open door here.
Yeah, go open.
You're not going to realize
Okay.
it.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
okay,
Our,
Okay, I think
our
we're good.
prayer session.
Yeah.
is past, so.
yeah, I think we'll finish up. So.
Well, it's good. I don't know what may got you to start thinking of that. Were you thinking about Daddy?